argued in the upcoming edition of The Spectator, well, you reminded me in your article when I just read it that you've been advocating for a long time that people work from home more.
Yeah.
You were inspired to that view by the economist Nassim Taleb, who's the author of Black Swan, of course. Do you think there are going to be big changes? Do you think commercial property is going to crash? Do you think the boss class, as it were, are now more relaxed because a lot of professional people in particular, have been working quite effectively from home and getting a lot done?
Well, 4 months ago, before the pandemic, I actually asked the marketing director of Zoom, again as a theoretical exercise, what would you quote to give the entire population full Zoom access? Okay, so normally it's sold, premium Zoom access is sold to a company. And I said, why shouldn't it be sold to a country? We spend money on roads, okay? Why is it perfectly acceptable to spend money on high speed too, don't get me started, and not acceptable to spend money on other forms of connecting people?
Yeah. Do you think the government's going to pivot, say, away from HS2 without getting into a discussion about that?
The behavioural science of
full fibre broadband, wouldn't that be a better way to?
Well, you now have an issue, which is, regional inequality is partly solved by this technology, I think.
Yeah.
Because one of the problems Jack Dorsey, who's now said everybody at Twitter can work from home, is he says, when I have offices in central San Francisco, I'm paying twice. I'm paying for the office space, but I'm also paying the kind of salaries that enable people to live in San Francisco. Yeah. And for anybody who's young, that's, I get the, at Ogilvy, when I think about it, we go and pay our younger staff not well, but tolerably, but half of it's going straight into the pockets of some buy-to-let landlord.
Yeah.
And that's not, that's not a great thing. So once people discover freedom of place alongside free time, that there's a value to to having freedom of place alongside free time. Yesterday, I worked in the garden in the sunlight. I got quite a lot done, but it felt like being on holiday. Okay.
Yeah.
And once people discover that and discover that, if you only need to be in London for 3 days of the week, do you really want to spend the remaining 4 days in London anymore? When the ratio was 5 to 2, I think the case was fairly compelling. If that ratio's 3 to 4 and reversed, different question.
Yeah.
And I think at some stage, the thing that always struck me as the behavioral science equivalent of Fermat's last theorem was why we were so slow to spot the value of this technology in the first place. And I can think of about 5 explanations. I don't know if any of them are true. One of them I think is important, which I mentioned in the Specky today, funnily enough, is that it's partly a framing problem. That when you said to staff, you're allowed to work flexibly, or you're allowed to work from home, it was framed as a concession. And people felt they were burning reputational capital every time they took advantage of it, Yeah. And I suddenly discovered with my own team of 15 people, it only worked, basically, if the boss did it, and John has just made exactly this point, okay? Yeah. When the boss does it, somehow it's okay. Secondly, it only worked with my team. I said, no, you're misunderstanding me. It's not that you can work from home. I actively want you to work somewhere else. Not necessarily home, for 1 or 2 days of the week. The reason being the Nassim Taleb point, which is that we have different kinds of work. Sometimes you want to be sociable, sometimes you want to focus. And different settings are variously conducive to different behaviors. So if you can partition your week into sociable Tuesdays and Wednesdays and kind of introvert Fridays, it pays you to perform those functions in a different place. I'd also argue that the modern open plan office is basically a terrible halfway house. It's neither fish nor fowl.
Yeah.
It isn't really sociable and it's not really secluded. I mean, it's you can't get chatty because you'll disturb the sado two seats along, but equally you can't sit in silence because someone come out and disturb you. So it's universities have, you have a buttery and you have a library. And those serve totally different purposes. So and you have a room.
Will this have big economic impacts then for, office buildings? Will it for travel infrastructure?
A lot of behaviour will revert. We must remember that a lot of human, nature is fairly long established and doesn't change much. On the other hand, the working patterns question has been changed. And suddenly, if you think about it, just to John Dodds's point, I think that if the people who burned up most of the travel and entertainment expenditure of employers had been junior staff rather than the senior management, I think they would have been pressured to use video conferencing 6 years ago. Okay. But you didn't want to be the chief executive who said, think you're going to stay in the Four Seasons for 3 days? Forget about it. Okay. So I think there was a strong element too, which is that it became such a badge of status to have your kind of frequent flyer miles and your, you know, and actually, of course, the weirdest thing I've discovered through this period is I lead a much more international life when I never leave the house than I did when I was a BA Gold frequent flyer member, because you know, I had a meeting which was someone from Perth, 2 people from a wildlife park in Kenya, and someone from the United States. I've had meetings with Ogilvy Tbilisi. I've had meetings with people in Peru. Now, it suddenly occurred to me, you could buy me a Learjet and I wouldn't be able to do all of that.